Today on Cryptic Mass Guitar, we take a look at the differences, really some, between the Gibson USA Les Paul Standard 60s and the Gibson Custom 1960 Les Paul Standard. Now, because we're talking about expensive guitars and even more expensive guitars, I really do feel the need to say that you don't need a custom shop. You don't even need a Gibson USA. If you're playing like an Epiphone or anything else and it really speaks to you, you make that thing sing, it, makes you want to continuously play that guitar, that's really all that matters. You're not more important of a person or a player because you've spent more money on a guitar. So if you have a Gibson USA, you're not more important than someone who owns an Epiphone. If you have a Gibson Custom, you're not more important than someone who owns a Gibson USA. If you have a Murphy Lab, like this one here, you're not more important than someone who has just a VOS custom shop. Just realize that before we, get into things here. This video here is basically a talking video, so that little sound sample that you heard, that's going to be the only one. I'm going to do a comparison between both of these guitars at a later date. I'm more than likely also going to do, I'll rent an Epiphone Les Paul Standard 60s, and I'll probably do a comparison between all three of them, so you can kind of see maybe, 3 levels of Gibson. But we're going to be talking about some differences here because I always get the question of okay, but it's the exact same guitar, it's just made in a different room, right? No, they're not the same. There are some differences here that Gibson has kind of made as a choice, like the tuners for the USA. The pickups are definitely a little different. They're Alnico 5 on the USA and Alnico 3 on the custom buckers on the Gibson Custom. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at the differences here. So starting off with the finish, the Gibson USA here has a gloss nitrocellulose finish. The Gibson Custom here has what's called a VOS finish. Technically this has a Murphy Lab finish, so it's finished in the Murphy Lab rather than in the regular custom shop building. There's some cracking and stuff like that on the finish on purpose. The custom shop finish is a little thinner, so you'll definitely get a different feel. You'll feel a little more of the wood in your body when you're playing. So it's not as thick of a gloss finish on it, so you can feel that on the neck, especially when you're playing. Both of these have mahogany backs. However, on the Gibson Custom here, this is a single piece of a lightweight mahogany, whereas this, the USA, is generally 2 pieces of mahogany. So there's a seam in there. They're super good at hiding the seams a lot of times. But that just means that there's 2 pieces of wood glued together for the mahogany. They both have carved maple tops on top of them. The Gibson USA generally carries a double A flame. This one here is not as noticeable unless you're kind of moving it around to see the flame. The Gibson Custom here, I don't know what they call their flames because it really does vary. From what I've heard, it's really also varies at the time of the year that they get the wood. But yeah, this flame here is more noticeable on camera, and at certain levels of light, it looks like there's barely any flame. Both of the tops are also 2 pieces of maple. Both guitars also have single-piece mahogany necks. They also have the slim taper neck carve. The Custom is ever so slightly thicker. This is not a generic slim taper, which is probably a stupid way of saying it. It's a 60s slim taper. So that means it's a little bit thicker than a regular slim taper that you would see on like a Les Paul Classic. But this is a little thinner than the Custom shop. Both also have rosewood fretboards that are bound. Now, the fret nibs that are on the Gibson USA are definitely a little thicker and a little bigger than the fret nibs that are on the Gibson Custom. The binding is also a little thinner on the Gibson Custom. What does that really mean? Why would that matter? It means that the fretboards are able to be rolled a little bit more on the Gibson Custom. And they don't have that really weird, like when they scrape the finish off on the neck for the fretboard, when they scrape that finish off, for some reason the Gibson Custom doesn't have that weird razor blade mark that it always has on the Gibson USA. That's just something to notice. It doesn't make a difference. The front of the headstock will see both of these with the inlaid Gibson logo. The inlays are a little different here. You can take note of the color of the USA and then take note of the color of the Gibson Custom. They're different. They both also have the Les Paul model silk screened on the headstock. You'll also notice that the placement of the silk screen is different on both of these. It's a little lower on the Gibson USA. Now, this is the big secret here. That's where all the tone is, where the silk screen is placed on the headstock, right? On the back of the headstock is, well, really where you're going to find a big difference. We have Grover tuners on the back of the USA, which weren't typically used until the 70s. However, a lot of people did change their tuners to Grovers. So Gibson, with their original collection, like if you look at the Flying V 70s model, very different from an actual 70s Flying V, they've kind of, to help aid in some difference, that's a really weird way of saying it, in the differences between the 50s and the 60s, they've done what they like to call, like, this is a typical upgrade that you would see on a 1960s Les Paul. So that's why you're seeing the Grovers here. On the Gibson Custom, we do have the double ring Kluson vintage deluxe tuners here. Now, one big difference between the two: on the USA, the Grovers are a modern sizing. So that means if you wanted to swap these out for like Grover locking tuners or any other type of modern locking tuner, that means you don't have to remount and widen the holes. Whereas on the Gibson Custom, you would have to remount the holes to make them bigger to fit a modern size tuner. Both guitars do have the CTS audio taper potentiometers. However, when looking with the cover off the rear for the cavity there, the Gibson USA has orange drop capacitors, whereas the Gibson Custom has paper and oil cap capacitors. Some people call them Black Beauties, although Black Beauties are a little different. Some people call them Bumblebees because of the stripes. I'm always asked about capacitors. Now, I'll put these guitars down for a second to explain this. Now, about 95% of guitar players will never use the capacitors that are in their guitars. It's just a fact. Most people like playing with the volume set to stun, the tone set to stun, all of that. So you just have everything up on 10 and full blast. I did that for years. Now, the capacitor does not come into play properly until you start to move your tone from 10 down to 9. Then it starts to actually come into the signal properly. So once you start bringing your tone back, dialing it back, that's really when the capacitor comes into play. A lot of people don't use it. So one thing to try to start, one thing that I've always done is, for leads at least, putting your guitar into the middle position and then start bringing the volume on the neck and the tone down on the neck a little bit to get a little bit of blending between the pickups. I've always done that because I find that if I'm not getting like something that's, you know, got a little bit of cream to the playing, doing that will give me a better tone for what I'm looking for in the leads. That's something I've always done. However, just try playing with your volumes and your tones. But the pricing here, like if you were to go out and buy an orange drop capacitor, in Canada at least, they're $6 per capacitor. The paper and oil capacitors, they really vary. You can get them for like $100 per capacitor. A lot of times you can get them for like $200, $300, or $400 per capacitor. You might know a guy. I'm not quite sure, but there's a major price difference between the two. On to pickups. The Gibson USA has the 61R and 61T, or as they're called now, the 60s Burstbuckers, or as they're also sometimes called now, the 60s Burstbuckers Tributes. These are Alnico 5 pickups. They're also unpotted, whereas the Gibson USA has the Alnico 3 unpotted custom buckers. The PAF style pickups, they varied on what magnets they used. A lot of people said they used Alnico 4s, and a lot of people said they used Alnico 3s. Truth is, they used different ones, and they all sounded awesome. The custom buckers, a lot of people really like them, myself included, to where like I would never ever replace the humbuckers on my guitars because they really work for me. You might replace them because they don't work for you, but yeah, those are the pickups that are in both of these guitars. There's a major price difference between both of these as well. I believe custom buckers in Canada, for a set of custom buckers, you might be able to find them for $500. You might be able to find them for $600. For the 60s Burstbuckers, honestly, you can probably look around and find them for like $250 or $300 Canadian, but you're more than likely going to find them between $300 and $400 Canadian. And on to the bridges. The Gibson USA here has the ABR1 bridge. However, when you look at it, if you look at how the ABR1 is attached to the body, it's into what I like to call a metal doweling system. There's a better way to say it, but my brain is too tired to say it a different way. So I always say it's a metal doweling system. So it's not connected directly to the body. On the Gibson Custom, we're looking at the ABR1 going directly into the body. So that means that it's connected a little more direct to the wood. Now those are the main differences here, like spec-wise, if you're looking at like components and woods and stuff like that. There's a lot of like nuanced things, like the knobs are sourced a certain way. The inlays on the custom are like acetate, celluloid acetate, and from, you know, watching different USA or custom shop tours and stuff like that, they're highly flammable. So there's a lot of nuanced differences here. I'm going to put these guitars down now. Now there's also another major difference that I want to talk about here, and I do have to preface it by saying I heard this when I was younger. I misheard the name, and I think around like 2013-ish, I started hearing it again, and I was like, oh, okay, that sort of makes sense. And then starting in 2019, things changed as well, and I kind of didn't believe this thing until I played them for myself. There's a lot of different discussions online about this, and it's really hard to narrow things down because I haven't tested things, you know what I mean? So I'm gonna talk about the glue that is used in the guitars. Now, the Gibson USA, they use tight bond glue. Okay, so that means the two pieces of mahogany are glued together with tight bond glue. The two pieces of maple glued together with tight bond glue. The maple top glued together with tight bond glue. The neck itself glued into the body with tight bond glue. You know where I'm going with this, okay? The Gibson Custom uses hot hide glue, which I used to hear it as either Hyed, like Hyed, or Hyatt glue, because I was, you know, like 12 or 13 going into a music store that had a little sandwich shop in it next to where the guitars were, and I would always hear the old guys talking, and I thought they were absolutely crazy, but it was great because I learned about the hot hide glue. I learned how to properly tune your guitar, lest you be an idiot. I also learned things like, you know, that people are stupid if they think that the neck is supposed to be absolutely flat. It's supposed to have the ever slightest bow in the neck to have that relief. That's why when you go ahead and get your guitar set up, they ask you what type of relief you want. Because if you have an absolutely flat neck, you're probably going to find that there's a little bit of fret buzz around the first 2 frets. But anyway, back to the glue. Hot hide glue crystallizes and it fuses the wood a little more than something like yellow glue or tight bond glue or all of those different types of glues. There were tests that tested the vibrancy of the glues, and they were inconclusive because really, that's who's crazy enough to do that test. And they're all with different types of guitars rather than the same guitar. But because of this, it kind of enhances the vibrancy and the acoustic properties of the guitar. Could be a conspiracy theory, but when I play the custom shop guitars and I play the USA guitars, there's a huge difference in feel and in overall acoustic volume. So if I'm playing without it plugged into an amp, it's like night and day to what I'm playing. I also find it neat because that kind of means that we have 3 species of wood that are fused together a little more. So that means the mahogany, the maple, and the rosewood are kind of interacting with each other a little more. Could be crazy here. But a lot of people do put a lot of emphasis on the hot hide glue being used rather than yellow or tight bond glue, or even sometimes super glue, which I think Paul Reed Smith uses, or at least they did for a while for their fretboards. So it's something that you have to mention because a lot of people do mention it. Gibson does sort of tout that, but of course, if you're trying to sell something as a little higher of a price, of course you're going to tout that. So just keep that in mind. I don't know for sure that that's the case, but it's something that I heard when I was younger, something that I heard maybe 10, 12 years ago, and it's something that I've noticed when I play a Gibson Custom versus a Gibson USA. So that's really the differences that you would see between the two. I mean, I could talk about cases and case candy and stuff like that, but honestly, the moment that I get the guitar, I look at the case and I go, oh, that's so cool. And then I put it in my case room, and then I never look at it again. So I don't know. That's just one of those things. People get really excited about cases and case candy. There's a major price difference as well between the 2 cases, but who really cares? It doesn't make your guitar play any better because of the case that comes with the guitar. So again, as I stated, there's not really any big sound samples between the 2 that we're going to do because this is just a talking video, which I hate making. I hate talking in videos. But I will be doing a sound sample comparison between both of these guitars. I'm not sure if I want to wait until I rent the Epiphone version to do like a big, huge comparison between the 2 and then all those different things. But keep an eye out on the channel if you are interested in seeing a more in-depth sound-wise comparison between both of these. Thanks for watching.